Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're really happy you're here tonight. It's a pleasure to see all of you, and it's actually, I feel, a lot of fun to do. My name is Kendra. I'm just going to be administrating this behind the scenes, and I'm going to hand it over to Emily, who is in the bookstore right now in Madison at RJ Julia, and take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here virtually for this wonderful event we have coming up. I'm going to just give you a quick little housekeeping and then a quick little intro. Thumbs up so that everybody can hear what's going on. Okay, excellent. We've done that well. That's good. Welcome again. Anna Solomon is going to be speaking about her fabulous new book, The Book of Thee. Going to have a few little details for you. You are muted and you will remain muted throughout the duration of the event. Please ask questions and they'll go in the chat box on your Zoom screen. We will get to as many questions as we possibly can. We'll be as good about that as possible. We have an RJ Julia staff person who's behind the scenes and she's monitoring the chat box for us, so we'll be in good shape there. At the top right corner of your screen is, if you would, select speaker view so that our author is highlighted on the screen. Gallery view shows all your participants if you prefer to do that. Now on to important things. We would love for you to please don't forget to buy the book, which you can get a copy of the book, which looks like this wonderful thing. And signed book plates are available. The link will be, you'll be able to see that in the chat box, and that will pop up occasionally as a nice little reminder. I just also want to let you know that tonight we will be recording this event for you. I think that is all we need about the little welcome for that, and I'm going to move into an intro and then let Anna take it away from there. But just so you know, we'll get things rolling. We are so pleased to have Anna Solomon with us this evening for the author of the Book of Thee. We have been keen on this book at RJ's from the very get-go. Last fall, in fact, Anna participated in an RJ Julia focus group at a luncheon in our hometown here in Madison. And it was a lovely afternoon in which we also included some bound galleys of the book. This is what the book does look like. I got a bound gallery which looks like this, which I'm not sure you can tell, but it is filled with stickies. I think 43 stickies, which were all the places I wanted to make a special mention of, because she wrote something either beautifully or something emotionally that hit home with me, or a great plot twist. So I am a big fan of the book. I loved reading it. I just finished it on Mother's Day, and I highly recommend it. But I am far from alone in my praise. The Book of Thee has been chosen as the May Book Club pick by both Good Morning America and Bellatrist, which is a highly regarded literary arts journal. Couple other reviews you may or may have not seen, but I'll read to you very quickly. The Book of Thee has been described as a bold, kaleidoscopic novel, intertwining the lives of 3 women across 3 centuries as their stories of sex, power, and desire finally converge in the present day. It has also been described as an intergenerational discussion of desire, duty, family, and feminism. The New York Times called it transporting. So we are going to hear tonight about very interesting women, Esther and Vashti, and 2 other women, one named Lily, a 40-year-old wife and mother in contemporary Brooklyn, and V, a young senator's wife in Watergate-era Washington. So this is Anna's 3rd novel. It has gotten great praise. I know you will enjoy hearing from her. She's going to do a bit of a read and then lots of chat, and we are happy to take questions and look forward to a lovely evening. So welcome, Anna, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Just like nod. Okay, awesome. That was an amazing introduction, and to have someone hold up your book with all the stickies of the places that moved you in some way. No, really, it's really a gift. So thank you. And thank you to you and everyone else at RJ Julia, because you have been supporting this book from the beginning, and I'm grateful, and it makes a huge difference to an author to have that kind of support from independent booksellers who are the backbone of this community that we're all part of. So thank you. And thanks to everybody for coming tonight. I know that this is a new world we're in, and it can be weird to be like, I'm going to go get on the computer now. And so anyway, I'm just very grateful that you're here. And I'm going to read very briefly, I promise, but just to give you a flavor. And I think that Emily gave a great introduction. The book really, it's about three very different women. This contemporary sort of mother of two in 2016 Brooklyn, a senator's wife in 1973 Washington, D.C., and then a teenager named Esther in ancient Persia in 462 BCE, who is Queen Esther, not as we know her, but as I've imagined her. And so anyway, I'm going to read from just a bit of the contemporary part. It takes place in Brooklyn. This is Lily. The only thing Emily got wrong is that she's 46, which you'll see referenced here, which is not a big deal. And I'm sure Lily would like to be taken for younger than she is anyway, so she appreciates it. Okay, so all you need to know is she's going to a sewing party to learn how to sew because she's decided she's going to make costumes for her daughters for the Jewish holiday called Purim. By the way, I just want to say you don't need to know anything about Purim to get this book. Like my editor didn't even know about it, and she bought the book and loves the book. So it's not a requirement. Okay. Atop a kitchen island gleams the party's centerpiece, a massive turquoise sewing machine from the 1960s. The hostess, Kyla, repeats the vintage as each guest arrives, explaining that the old machines are superior if you treat them right. This one was her grandmother's, she adds, and all the women ooh and ah at this, Lily included, though the machine fills her with fear. She imagined this would be a needles and thimbles kind of sewing party. She thought she might cut out some pieces of cloth, then wrap them toga style around the girls and call it a day. But Kyla has laid out patterns, which as far as Lily can tell, appear to be for dresses that entail sleeves and necklines, and in one case, a pocket. Lily wants to whisper something snarky, but she doesn't know any of the other women well enough to trust they'll take to her snarkiness, and she's realizing as they begin to pepper her with questions that they know each other very well. It's palpable, the togetherness of women who've stood around like this on countless other occasions in other kitchens. They are a group. Lily, too, has a group, but she and her friends have never invited a stranger into their midst. Their wine isn't as good, the atmosphere they create isn't as cheerful, and they don't have dedicated playrooms like Kyla. On the other hand, Lily's group includes women of various sizes, shapes, colors, and hair textures, and they're skilled at using all these facts, from the mediocre Sauvignon Blancs that ostensibly allow them to spend money on more important things, to the squished apartments, to the au naturel hair, to make them feel superior, more authentic somehow, more real, to women like these. These women, a couple of whom appear no older than 33, which would make them 13 years younger than Lily, ask Lily with near jubilance how long she's been in the neighborhood and how old her kids are and whether she works and what her husband does. And Lily, answering as best she can, wonders at how easy it would be if you mixed up these women and Lily's women and stood them in a line to tell which ones belong to which group. It's a depressing thought because it suggests that they're all basically in permanent uniform and that their superficial differences, these women's blown dry hair and diamond rings, etc., as opposed to Lily and her friends with their chunky bracelets and scuffed boot clogs like something out of Heidi, actually portend deeper ones like what they think and feel. One of the women, upon hearing that Lily used to teach at the city colleges, says, "That's so cute." And Lily, feeling mean and small, excuses herself to go check on the children, half hoping one of them will be sick so that she'll have to take them home. But she finds them cheerfully rolling and cutting homemade Play-Doh with the other children at a low, large table probably made in Finland. Ro looks up first, then June, both girls with almost absurdly happy expressions on their faces, and Lily feels the kind of deep, unadulterated love for them that she experiences when they are asleep, or when Ro lets her hold her as they read. This feeling in this moment feels as if it could be felt eternally, if only she lived in this apartment and had this table and this particular bespoke Play-Doh. Lily smiles and waves until, in unison, like happy Finnish cows, her daughters turn back to their work. In the kitchen, Kyla asks Lily to give everyone a brief primer on Purim, which causes Lily, who feels at once defensive of and embarrassed by her tribe, to issue forth a brief and conflated account of the holiday and the story that sounds something like lots of drunkenness and misogyny, but also female worship, which you could argue is a form of misogyny, and a so-so king and good queen and evil side guy. By the end, Lily is so turned around, she adds a final ambiguous punchline. It's kind of a burlesque. And then Kyla, undaunted, begins introducing the women to the machine, identifying its various parts and what they do. Lily is hungry. In her nervousness, she's drunk too much wine, but the food has been laid out at the opposite end of the kitchen, so that to get to it, you must walk away from the group and make a thing of wanting it. As Kyla talks, Lily's fear mounts. Where are the thimbles? Where is the softcore sewing party? But then Kyla is turning to her and looking deep into her eyes, so deeply that Lily notices the remarkable blue of Kyla's irises and wonders if she wears colored contacts, and saying, "You're up first, Lil, you'll do great," as if they've known each other forever. And her voice is quiet now and tender, as if she senses Lily's struggle. "Do you mind?" Kyla asks Lily, and before Lily can figure out what she's talking about, Kyla is behind her, taking Lily's hands into her own. "They'll start with a straight stitch," she says, and suddenly the machine is purring, and Lily, guided by Kyla, is sewing. She feels a pleasurable shock, as if she's jumped into cold water. There's vibration and fabric, and Kyla's hands on hers, and the satisfied grumble of the machine, and the cheers of the women gathered around to watch, and at the small of her back, the gentle press of Kyla's belly. And Lily realizes not only that Kyla has a belly, like anyone, but also how long it's been since someone has taken the time to teach her something. I'll stop there. Thanks. Woo. Oh, Emily, I think you're muted.
Yep. So did you want to talk a little bit about just the book itself, the characters, give them an idea of the different women involved in the story, and then I can ask you some more questions, about each one of them.
Well, so you just heard from Lily, who's clearly neurotic and a lot of fun, and living this life that she was raised by this sort of staunch feminist in the 70s and 80s who has put a lot of pressure on her to be a particular kind of woman, which was not the woman she has turned out to be. She did have sort of a career in academia for a while and then left it to become a wife. She's a second wife, and she's had these 2 kids. And at the moment in her life, what she's doing is being a mother, and it's turning out to be both fulfilling in a lot of ways and also not. She's really ambivalent, and she has a lot going on in terms of struggling with sort of her intellectual and sexual desires, and what it means. She's struggling with her mother, who's the one who's constantly sort of like, "Oh, you must love taking care of children all the time," very judgmental. And then the second character, I mean, they could go in any order, but is a senator's wife named Vivian Barr, who we meet sort of as her husband, who's this kind of up and coming senator, is up for re-election under a lot of pressure, and he winds up asking her to do this very humiliating favor for him, which involves her taking her clothes off in front of the men that he has gathered around her. And that story is actually based in the biblical story of the Book of Esther. That's a story that's based around Vashti. There's another V for you. So I've got Vashti is sort of the original, and then Vivian Barr is sort of playing out that role of this first wife who is asked to do this really horrible thing, refuses, and then is banished from her life as she knows it. And then there's also a third V, Vera, who's the first wife to Lily's husband, Adam. Anyway, not to get too complicated. So we see what happens. Where does, my question was, what happens to Vashti? And in this case, what happens to Vivian Barr? Where does she go? It turns out she goes, this doesn't really give anything away, but she flees to sort of a friend's house in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is where I grew up and where I'm actually quarantining now with my family. We live in Brooklyn normally, but I'm in my mother's empty house at the moment.
Yeah.
And then you have Esther. So she's 17 years old. She's a Jewish orphan living in the camp sort of outside the palace walls. And her story, as I've imagined it, turns out to be very unlike the one that or if you know the story, the one that you sort of think of her as. And I think for me, you know, I grew up with this idea that Esther was the heroine. Clearly, it's the Book of Esther. She was good. She was brave. She was, she was respectful. And Vashti was bad, and she was, possibly a leper. She was often portrayed as a prostitute. There were all these ways in which she was framed in this way. And I was interested in, well, wait a second. I don't think the story actually matches up with the story I've been told about the story, which is, I think, often what happens around stories around women's lives. You know, we want to sort of have these very simplistic ways of saying, like, good, bad, villain, hero, wanton, virtuous. And so I was interested in part in the book in kind of messing up those dichotomies and playing with them. I'll stop there because I'm sure there will be other questions.
Well, I want to let the audience understand that it does sound a little confusing, but Anna does a masterful job of actually linking this. It does, when I started the book, and you have Esther and Vashti and this one, but your writing is incredible in that it does all link nicely. And that was, you could talk a little bit about, there were certain things that I found were certain threads, literally, through your book that is helpful. And maybe we can identify a couple that, the sewing, the thread of that, and it seemed like the women like to hum.
There's a lot of humming.
There were a couple of things, and even a name drop of made a connection. Then I think it's really incredible job you did of linking. Maybe you could talk about whether you had thought of it as a puzzle you were piecing together or something.
I'm glad it felt that way. And I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I very much, it's woven together in a way that, that those chapters move very naturally from one to the next. And some of that, as you noticed, is done through sort of these literal or these concrete threads of objects and gestures, like the humming, the sewing. There's a lot of drinking. There's also I think I thought of it, so I think of it sort of as a braiding. And I think I used to work as a radio journalist in my 20s. And I think my work doing that really helped me know how to write this book. In the sense that to some degree it was an architectural job, like a structural job, but in other ways it was kind of a musical one. I had to figure out the beats, and where they needed to come, and how to make especially the ends and the beginnings of the chapter feel resonant with one another, so that, there's one chapter that ends and then another will begin saying dusk here too, so that there's a narrative voice that I created that does some of that work you're talking about, that can kind of see across these different women and across their times and bring the narrator kind of brings its own intelligence to the story, if you will.
You feel like you're in that. I think also that you had the 3 parts was also very helpful in setting that. It was, I think, exile, part 2 was wandering, and part 3 was reinvention, which I think laying that out, again, structurally for me as a reader, and maybe for the listeners now, can understand these women had phases that they were, as we all do, evolve in our life.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That was important to me to figure out the structure. And then I thought also for readers. And I should say too, I did write, people have asked, I did write this in the order that it appears. So I didn't, and I think that's an important part of it. I didn't sort of write each woman's thread and then attempt to braid them together. The book very much was written in this interweaving fashion. And it does have these parts. So there's a lot of structural work. I constantly was putting up, I have index cards that I would use to map out each part. And then, and often I would have to play with them. Like, well, maybe this goes in this order. And what happens if this revelation comes after that one? And, so some of it is playing and being willing to revise and rethink. And one thing that actually came out of the luncheon, the RJ Julia luncheon, that was helpful is each chapter has a title of its place. And then it has sort of a title, but I also put in each character's name at the top. Not many people, but some just felt like it just helps give, again, like just, you have no question of where you are and your grounding. And so that was a helpful thing to come out of that we were still able to put in. to the manuscript.
Yeah, that you needed a couple of those visual cues also, that this was a link to where you were in that story, in that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had interviewed authors doing events before too, where some people work with stickies. I guess I'm in that category of loving my Post-it notes. Others have index cards, or I remember watching the movie The Little Women, and she was always moving her chapters around. So it seemed like this book kind of called out for a puzzling kind of.
It did.
How long did it take you to write the book? How long?
Oh, yeah. So before I answer that, just I should say too, in case it's not clear, I think that Emily made this clear, but this story's also, they converge in a plot way. I mean, they all do come together. It's not like they just go along the whole time. So you come to have different recognitions along the way of how, of like, oh, that's where these connect.
Yeah, it's like a penny drops every once in a while. It's like, I got them.
It took me, I think it's fair to say, about 3 years, give or take. It's always hard to kind of estimate these things because there's things that happen in the middle, or like my last book came out, or things like that. But I think it's fair to say about 3 years.
Yeah. Do you write every day?
I write in a not every day, like Monday through Friday kind of way. At times I get to write on the weekends as well. I have 2 kids, and so I'm usually in a schedule that matches with school, which, as we know right now, is like not happening. But yes, in regular life, if we can call it that, I write every day. I go in Brooklyn, I go to a writer's space, like, a shared space, because again, something I don't know, will that ever happen again? I don't know. But I have, like many New Yorkers, a pretty small apartment. And so I go somewhere else to write.
Yeah. And just to give them a little more flavor on the character V, or Vivian, as she emerges, that time period was the 70s. So some of that behavior of that makes sense if you realize that this was in the 70s, not contemporary time.
Right.
I found her a really interesting character. Can you tell us a little bit more about her and how she got from where we meet her to the end? That was quite, I thought, really interesting character.
Yeah.
Is that someone you knew or modeled after in any way?
I won't give away where we meet her at the end, but I do think that she was probably my favorite character to write, and she was very clear to me from the beginning. There's some characters it takes a sort of many drafts for them to become clearer, and she was clear from the start. And she's someone, she's sort of noble stock in the DC sense, in the sense that, like, her father was a senator and her grandfather was a governor, and now she's married a senator, and her mother and her grandmother were the wives of she's very tied to convention in that way. She's expected to follow through. She has this part of her that doesn't want to have children. And so this is one key piece for her that's sort of really hard to fit into the world, the sort of what's expected of her. And that's, I think, part of what, like, one of the things that makes it, gives her or puts her in a state of conflict when we first meet her. And in relationship to that a little bit, she's also started, this is in 1973, sort of in the throes of the second wave women's movement. And she has started to occasionally participate in this, what's called this women's group, sort of a women's liberation group, which is a group of women who are completely different than the sort of women she's used to hanging around with in terms of, politicians' wives, etc. And so she's experiencing this sort of, I could look at it this way, but I could look at it that way. And she can kind of imagine herself in both places, or each place, but not in both. Right. And as I'm talking, you can probably recognize some of the themes that from the scene I read, which is also like women thinking about the groups and the way that we sort of type ourselves and type other women. And I think the book, it really is about the way we connect with each other, and then also the ways in which we compete with each other.
Yeah.
And so you can see that kind of running throughout. But yeah, Vivian is a really interesting character. She goes through some really, she really changes over the course of the book. And also some very essential parts of her stay the same. Yeah. So, yeah.
And tell us a little bit about your research, or maybe I don't know your background that well, but about Esther and Vashti. Was that something the story you grew up and knew from childhood, or is that something that you researched to, bring to life?
Well, both. I mean, I grew up with the story, so I heard one version of it, which was sort of like, good, you have to dress up like Esther and Vashti's bad. And then I went back into it as an adult and as a writer and really started reading it. Like, well, what does this actually say? It turns out to be much more complex because, it's sort of like, well, wait a second, if Vashti's refusing to do something gross, then isn't she virtuous somehow? And like, oh, and wait a second, Esther's actually kind of a concubine in a harem. That doesn't sound great. It's sort of like, and then I started doing a lot of, reading. First, I went and spoke with a rabbi and I asked, because I'm not learned or a scholar in Jewish or any other biblical texts. And I went and I said, well, where do I start? And so she helped me figure out like where are the writings about the writing? There's obviously thousands of years of writing that has been gathered of people thinking about and arguing about these stories. And so I went to that, and that was really educational for me. And then I kind of figured out my own place in it. And there's a point in the book sort of toward the end where I kind of play with a lot of the kind of throw in a lot of the interesting interpretations that I came across. But yeah, it was a process, and of really also just kind of learning how to learn about it, because that was something I just didn't know how to do.
Well, we have a question popped up in the chat box, so it's from Emily, not me, Emily, but another Emily. Did you have to research the political realm, or were you raised in a political family?
I was not raised I mean, my family talked about politics, but they were in no ways, although I say that, my father was actually a city councilor in the city of Gloucester growing up, but briefly, and when I was like an infant. So I don't think of us that way, but then I'm like, but yeah, no, what I think part of what gave me, I mean, I've been interested in politics in various ways, but my main experience in that realm, so to speak, which is a good word for this book, is that I worked in the Senate TV radio gallery in the Capitol building for 2 years, from 2001 to 2003. I was there in that insane year of 2001, for 9/11, and then for the anthrax, and then for the sniper. Like it was, and I was in my early 20s, so, or my mid 20s maybe, but it was a very formative time, both in terms of those things, but also as a reporter. I was working as an environmental reporter for a national public radio show. It was an education in policy and politics and how things work. And by no means do I know all of it. I mean, 2 years is nothing in a place like Washington. But at the same time, I think I got a good handle on the culture and the dynamics. And then I also did a bunch of research specifically into the 1970s. And this was Watergate era. So that was its own kind of thing that I needed to figure out. And I took a bunch of license as well, but
yeah. No, you captured that time, and I think of that culture of that moment. I was talking to some friends about now in era of Me Too, it was very different in the 70s in DC for sure. So, well, we have another question here from Francis. Consciousness raising groups, consciousness raising in quotes, it was almost scandalous in the time, in some circles, if you attended these in the 70s. And I know that actually to be true. And did you find that, that element in your research about that?
I did, yeah. And I mean, some of that research was like talking to my mother and talking with her friends and talking with my aunt and talking with other friends of mine who were that, of coming of age in that era. And so, yeah, and my stepmother talked to me. She was living in rural Maine at the time. And she talked about, this would have been a little later, 1977 is when it came out, but the book, The Women's Room, which probably a lot of people, by Marilyn French, which is one of these books, it's like, was a huge thing. And then most women in my generation haven't heard of this book, which is amazing to me. So a book like that. So I got to hear about sort of, what it meant for her to she was like, people would drive literally from hundreds of miles around to come talk about it with each other. Like all these women would just gather. And my mother actually formed a women's group in the 70s here in Gloucester and I think that, so yeah, there was a lot, some of it came out of research and out of reading other texts and reading, archives, but also just people, which is my favorite type of research.
Right. Well, there's not another question in the chat box, but please, everybody, feel free. No question is unreasonable, so we like to hear anything you have on your mind. I'm going to ask you, we've mentioned Gloucester a couple times. That is your hometown. That plays a big role in the book, and that setting, and going into the woods there. Can you just talk a little bit about the landscape of Gloucester during the book?
Yeah, it does play a big role. I think for me, I mean, I don't always write about Gloucester, but I probably will always continue writing about Gloucester. I'll keep returning to it. And, you know, I was very shaped by this place, and it's where I grew up, which wasn't in this house. We were down like a half-mile driveway in the woods on the water. And I spent like a huge amount of my time by myself outside, like imagining things. Like that was just a lot of, I think, how my consciousness formed. And so when I think about, you know, I think writing is such a bringing characters to life involves really being in tune with their sensory experience. And I think that my sensory experience was so informed by this place. I'm looking out the window right now, like these amazing clouds, you know, by the smell of the salt and by the feel of the rocks and by the, you know, all of it. And I think we all come from some place, obviously. And some of us, I think people have different relationships to those places, and some of them are more people oriented. For me, it was very much like the place. And so I love writing about Gloucester. My last book was set entirely here, Leaving Lucy Pear. But the part that's set here in this one, with where Vivian goes after she's sort of banished, it's really becomes a transformative place for her, and especially those woods, not to give away what happens in the woods, but sort of her sense of transformation and of liberation, to use, you know, that maybe overly used word, but you know, she comes to a much clearer sense of her own power and her own autonomy in that place.
Well, here we go. From Cicely, excuse me if I've got that wrong. What are you reading right now?
I'm reading a great book right now that just came out 2 or 3 weeks ago called Kept Animals by Kate Milliken, which I'm really, really liking. And another book recent book called Saint Ivo by Joanna Hirschon. I think in the Times Book Review yesterday, the review of that, really good. And I've been revisiting some old favorites. I've been sort of dipping back into Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which is just spectacular. And also for a couple things that have kind of asked for kind of all-time favorites, I've also been dipping back into The Known World, the Edward P. Jones novel, which is unlike anything I've read before. That's a handful.
Yeah, for you. That's a diverse group of books, it sounds like. So that's great. All different kinds of reading. I didn't really do in the intro talk much about your background. I know you've alluded to, I think it was NPR that you worked for a little bit. Could you give everyone a little bit more background just on, you know, either your schooling or your writing evolution, and how you got to be where you are now?
Yeah, I went to Brown for undergrad. We were talking about that before, because both Emily and I have lived in Providence at different points. And I came out of it. I was writing, you know, poetry at that time, and a lot of analytical writing.
Even from a young age, were you writing? Were you?
I was always writing, but I didn't sort of think, I was always writing all sorts of things: poetry, stories, academic writing, you know, I was interested from a young age in reporting. But I didn't really think of myself, I wasn't one of those kids who's like, I'm going to be a writer, or I'm going to write novels. And it wasn't actually until I graduated from college that I started writing fiction, in the sense that we, you know, like started really kind of thinking about it as something I wanted to try to do. And obviously that wasn't going to pay the bills. So I moved home and started waitressing. And I waitressed, and I worked for an amazing radio documentary producer who taught me how to make radio. And this was at a different time in our economy. And I was able to then pretty quickly get a job with a radio show. And I did that for a number of years, and loved it, was given an incredible amount of autonomy for that age. I mean, I went all around the country interviewing people about environmental policy and politics. It was incredible. And then I decided, all the time I was writing short stories, and I decided I'm going to try to apply to grad school and see if I can get funding. I'm going to go.
Yeah.
Like if I can not lose money on this, I want to spend a couple years and see where I can take it. And I got into, I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop in Iowa City,
wow.
which is the oldest writing program in the country, and was a very amazing experience. I think especially, well, just to have the time, and then the peers I met there, you know, I mean, you know, a lot of these people's names, these are like, they're incredible writers, and to have that kind of, to learn from your peers is a real gift.
Wow.
Yeah. And so since then I've been, you know, like a lot of writers, I teach a lot, and I write copy for nonprofits, and I write my own novels, and I, you know, it's like, it's a patchwork, and I, you know, and it's hard, and I love it. I mean, I'm so grateful to be able to do this, and that you know, to have my books get published and to have readers, and it's wonderful.
Your two previous books, I don't think I gave the names specifically. Lucy, could you tell us about the two previous books in that?
Leaving Lucy Pear is set in the 1920s on Cape Ann, Massachusetts, which is where Gloucester is. It's about a mother and an abandoned daughter, and then the woman who raises that daughter. I haven't talked about the book in so long. I'm like, I think that's what it's about. And then The Little Bride is set in the 1880s, and it's actually about a mail order bride from Odessa in Ukraine to South Dakota, where there was this sort of there was a Jewish pioneering movement that I had never known about until I learned about it, and then was like, I'm going to write this novel. So, yeah.
Your latest book, The Book of V, a couple reviews I read said it was reminiscent of The Hours, which I know was, you know, extremely popular book. How do you feel about that comparison with your work?
Well, I will say it's very, first of all, I love it. And second of all, it was very, for me, it was very much an inspiration for this book in a very explicit way. And I think, you know, I talk about the book in the beginning of my acknowledgments, and I very much was, you know, as I was coming up with this story, I was like, I think, you know, that book gave me courage to write this book, because in the same way that I do with the Book of Esther, you know, what Michael Cunningham does with Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, there's this sort of book, and you see how that book comes to be.
I was thinking of Mrs. Dalloway, actually. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so you see how that book comes to be, and then you see women kind of playing out and reckoning with that book. And that's what I'm doing as well. You know, you have this book, the Book of Esther, and then you see women, you see how it comes to be, and then you see women living it out and reckoning with it. So it taught me a lot, and it gave me a lot of courage to do it. They're very different books. The sort of beats come at different times, the revelations, but I think, you know, I welcome the comparison.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I think that book may have been made into a movie. I can't remember.
It's a great movie.
Yes, and do you thinking that might happen with the Book of V?
It would be great. I have a wonderful film agent who's signed on because she loves the book and she's fantastic. So hopefully, you know, she's out there working on it.
Oh,
I know.
Great.
I feel like saying, well, look, they already made the movie of the Hours. Just you know, it's clearly can be done.
Yeah, I think it has you know, great potential. The characters and the place and all that. And I just one of the things that sort of came very strongly across to me is something I think we all sort of struggle maybe or think about a lot, is what we think we should be and who we are. That seemed to be a theme that the women in this book were trying to figure out. Am I accurate in that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because some of the lines that have resonated most with readers are just go right in on that. You know, there's one with Lily that's something like, the type of woman you imagine yourself becoming does not exist.
I think that's on a sticky here.
Yeah, people, you know, it's like so many women have told me like, oh my gosh, like I just got chills reading that, you know. And then there are others, someone was pointing out one actually in the others that I wasn't even as aware of. But yeah, I think, you know, it runs through the whole thing. And I really wanted to write about how complex women are and how many women each woman contains, and, you know, get at the way in which we're so often, we're sort of either told stories or we tell them ourselves in a way that seem to reduce us to types, and that none of us actually experience ourselves in that way, and to kind of open up that question and push on it a little bit. So yeah, I think it will resonate with anyone who is interested in you know, the complexity of women's experiences and lives.
Yeah.
Which hopefully is a lot of
really, you know, that Lily kind of expressed that well, but the others, all of them were facing that same, as I think we all do at some or many times in our life to do that. So questions that we often are asked in these things is, what's next for you? I know it seems like you just got here, but
I know
people are always eager to know.
I'm like a teeny bit into playing around with a new book, but so not anywhere, you know, and I was just kind of I just went in February on a little retreat to kind of start really, you know, diving into it. And needless to say, it's been a little hard, both with this book coming out, but also the current situation in the sense of like the 24/7 home with family.
Right.
There's so much to do with, which I'm very grateful for. Promoting this book is awesome, but then it means that like any other time, like there's just not enough time to do it all. But I will, I think in a few weeks, I will start. It'll probably just look like me getting up at 6 each morning and taking an hour and a half and just getting some words down. And and it's, I think so far that it's actually set in the near future, which obviously I haven't done yet. So, and we'll see. It might also change because the near future, as I imagine it now, as opposed to 3 months ago, I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems
I was going to ask you about that, and if you discuss that with your writer friends, sort of how this moment in time will influence your work going forward or have an impact on your writing life.
Yeah, we've just sort of, I see the conversation happening. I haven't talked so much with people about it yet, but I think people are certainly thinking about it. You know, I've seen jokes about like everything is going to be set like pre-February 2020, unless you want it to be you know, it's like, how do you grapple with it? I think for most people, it takes, and I mean, there are essayists and there are nonfiction writers and there are some fiction writers who really kind of turn around the current moment in a way where they're like, they sort of make sense of it and make fiction out of it. Most writers I know, it takes time for these things to settle through us and sort of to know. I mean, I think this moment is just so in flux that I think it's going to take a while before we have any sense of sort of the literature that's going to come out of it.
Yeah, it seems like that, I think, in many people's worlds. But you know, I think creative people that are trying to figure out how to keep their creativity, their creative process going at a time like this while being sheltered in place. And then when they do, the outcome of that can be very different than maybe what they thought you had, you know, previous to that. So, you know, it's interesting to hear your side of it.
Yeah.
So, do we have any more questions? Anybody can ask anything they'd like. Just type in something if they're on. If not, we'll carry on a little bit longer. I think we're getting close to our closing up time. Is there anything, Anna, that I did not ask you that maybe is on your mind, or something else you'd like to talk about?
No, I mean,
it comes to mind.
You know, I only, you know, as far as, I just hope that if people have questions, they'll ask them, and that if you know, that you've gotten a sense of the book through the conversation a little bit. And I hope, I mean, I do want to say, and whether it's my book or another one, I hope that you'll buy a book from RJ Julia, because we want to all be able to walk into our bookstores after this and want them to be there. And, you know, that none of this is free for them, obviously, like they're all, you know, so just my shout out in that direction. I hope it's my book, but if it's not,
thank you very much.
And also to say that if
we go.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just, there is a question that popped up, but if you'd like to either finish your thought or we can dive right into the question. Okay, it says, will you please tell the story of the small sewing kit in your life and tell us why you included a sewing as a link in the book?
Who is that? That must be someone who knows me asking that question. Oh, it's Francis. Did we talk about this at the lunch? You have a good memory. Okay. Yes, I was given one of those, you know, the sew on the go kits. I don't know if any of you were given these, you know, mine was like this little plastic with red on the bottom, clear on the top with the spools inside, by my grandmother when I was 9 and I was going off to summer camp. And I wrote an essay about this that didn't wind up getting published, but maybe someday it will. And, you know, in this very sort of gruff way, because she was a very joyless person, and she was just like, you need to have this. And I took it in much the same way. Like, I didn't touch it for years and years, but something about it, like I just kept it, and I brought it everywhere with me. So I brought it to camp, and then I brought it to college, and then I brought it to like it stayed like with all my stuff and with me, and it was somehow important to me. What I didn't know then, and I might not even known this in the fall when I spoke with you, Frances, is that her mother, my great grandmother, was a seamstress. And I think that my grandmother probably couldn't have imagined that I had no idea what to even do with this thing. Like no one had taught me what to, this is not, you can't sew things with this, but you can mend, right? Or you can sew buttons back on, which is really what they're made for. And at some point in my 20s, I had to sew a button back on, and I did it, and I opened up this box. It felt like a time capsule, and the thread was all like faded, and I just started using it. And now I still have it, and I use it I still sew buttons on with it. And now I feel it's kind of given me this other window into my grandmother, who was, as I said, sort of a very stern and practical woman. But I think as I've become a mother, I mean, it's been a while now, but it's given me more appreciation for that side of her, and for the part of her that, even though she didn't seem warm, she was taking care. She was trying to take care of me in that way, even though I didn't understand it in that way at the moment. I mean, that runs throughout the book too, I think, is that and you see it with Lily and her mother, and you see is that I think it takes getting older and growing up and having certain experiences, for me at least, to sort of understand better the people who came before me, and to fully appreciate them, yeah.
I think actually also sewing is very relevant, very relevant these days. Many of my friends I know are sewing masks and sewing this, and people have pulled out their sewing machines and like never before. And, people have, dusting them off, or someone just told me they had inherited their mother's sewing machine, and it was like this workhorse thing, and she was making masks and stuff. So I think sewing in a way is also something that we are all, more essential in our life than maybe it has been, in
I'm really glad you mentioned that. So, I actually, we were in a house at first. We couldn't come right here. We were in a house where I was able to sew. I found a bunch of things, and I found a pattern, and I sewed 4 masks, one for each of us. And it was very proud of it. And I didn't have a sewing machine, so it took like an hour and a half to do each one. But I do think, so whether it's, sewing or planting gardens, or, people, I think a lot of us, for good reason, are sort of like, oh, we need to be able to take care of ourselves in ways that we've been sort of outsourcing for so long, right? Like, I heard from friends who were in Costa Rica for a year. They're back now, but they've been in touch with their friends who are still there. And they said that in Costa Rica, things were not, the only thing that you couldn't get, the only thing that sold out there was seeds, which I thought was really interesting. Like the response to the pandemic was that people bought seeds, which I guess has happened here a lot, probably on also toilet paper and all of that.
I have another thing to question to throw out. Can you speak about the polarization of the characters, and in this form of the Madonna and Mary Magdalene horror model, Madonna horror model? Can you want to tackle that?
Well, yeah, I think it's a great, I think it's actually similar to what I was saying before. I mean, I should say right off that I haven't done a lot of hard thinking about Madonna, Mary Magdalene dichotomy, but I think that it's very much an extension of, and I think you can see it in every culture, you can see it in every religion, that there's always a story about sort of the bad woman and the good woman. And you see it in the beginning of the Bible with Lilith and Eve as well, right? Like, and I mean, Lilith isn't actually there, she was written in later, but there's always this rush, or this an urge to have sort of the bad and the good, and and in that case, the prostitute and the immaculate one, when we all, where does that urge come from? What is the myth? I mean, one of the things that runs through my book is this idea that, and I think it's true, I think we come up with the stories that we need at a given moment. And I think it's worth thinking when it comes to something like Madonna and Mary Magdalene, and when it comes to Vashti and Esther, and when it comes to Eve and Lilith, like, who do those stories benefit? not women, I think. You know, and which power structures do they support and affirm, you know? So I think, yeah, I think you're right to bring it up. And I think it comes out of the same cloth, so to speak, to bring up another sewing term.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we could go on with those about weaving and sewing and stitching and the common threads and all of that. But it certainly does seem to work for this. We have a few more minutes left. If there's anybody else would like to chime in, we can do that. I will remind you all again to not forget that we want to encourage you all to go to the website to purchase the Book of V at rjjulia.com. We have signed book plates that will go along with your purchase, and we would be happy to get that order taken care of and shipped out to on your way. So keep that in mind. But we have a few more minutes left, I think, if anybody wanted anything else. If not, I could probably keep peppering you with questions for a while longer. But why don't we we'll think of maybe a few more minutes, and then we'll offer if anybody wants to order, and we'll do a wrap. But I think it's appropriate. You're sitting in front of a very impressive bookcase there. Is that your family's reading that you might have grown up with?
Actually, yeah, I'll give you a little better view. It goes up. Whoa.
Oh that's fantastic.
Yeah. It's so funny. I got to do this great video today. First, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Bellatrist, but they had me do this thing called Stacked, where you sort of show different books. So I got to videotape this, and it meant that I also went back to a video that I'd taken last year when I was visiting my mother and her husband in South Carolina. So this is their collection of books. This is just one bookshelf in this house. And he has there, and I can tell you where you can see this because I posted it today, but or it will be posted on Bellatrist, but there's a second story in their house that literally it's 360 degrees around, built into this enormous room of books. Like there must be, you know, I don't know, 5,000, I don't know how many books are there. So my mother's a great reader. He's a real collector, and he's an organizer. So things are actually alphabetical. And it happens, probably not totally coincidentally, that a lot of their books are a lot of my favorites as well. And as I discovered earlier today, some of my books are actually here. Because I was like, well, right. There were points in my life where I probably didn't have space or this or that. And there's the biography of Virginia Woolf by Hermione Lee, which is an amazing, amazing book. I opened it up today and saw that it was inscribed to me upon my graduation from college.
Oh, how great.
It's here.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I think we're about to wrap. I don't see anything else coming up here. I just want to thank you so much and tell you again how much I enjoyed the book and how much great praise it's getting in the publishing world, and highly encourage everyone to go to the website, get it either for you or for someone in your family, or daughter, mother, grandmother, or whomever. But thank you so much, Anna. It was really a pleasure speaking with you. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming tonight. You made my first virtual hosting event a pleasure. So thank you all very, very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for the little claps. I see them.
Oh, I'll clap. Thank you very, very much.
I hope you enjoy the book.
We will.
And you can find me at my website or my social media. I'm on all those places if you're interested. And if you wind up with more questions too, the book, I think it was mentioned at the GMA book club, if anyone's on Instagram, they're going to do Friday discussions where I'm going to answer more questions. And so if you're on Instagram, you can go follow GMA book club and you'll see that. And that's going to be fun because people will throw out questions, and then I'll take like a little video, and those will get posted on Fridays.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and the Bellatrist thing, that video of the 360-degree thing should post soon there. So if you follow Bellatrist, anyway. But I'm also, like, I have a website. Just find me, and if you have any follow-ups.
Yeah.
And thank you for supporting RJ Julia. And thank you, RJ Julia, for all you do to connect books with readers. Really great.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, very much. Have a nice evening.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.